more about ourselves in a few minutes, but we're going to start with an activity. Really? There we go.
There you go. There you go.
All right. We're going to start with an activity around agency in the 22nd century classroom. Everyone has the same tasks, but you're going to be divided into two groups for how you do that. You all must demonstrate at least two necessary components and must have at least one piece of evidence to support each component. So you're going to come up with two things in your classroom that are preparing the students for the 22nd century. Because in theory, they're supposed to look to be 130, so they'll need that too. And on your big yellow Post-it is a little Post-it, and it has a bit.ly link. This side has one, this side has the other. Go ahead and open that up. You're going to find instructions for this activity.
And so we'll kind of keep this up for a little bit. This is the common characteristics, but of course most of your instructions for the activity will be found in the bit.ly link. We'll be circulating those.
Just a few more chairs, so that's your welcome to pick a side.
To let you know, you have about 15 minutes for this task, so we're looking for a bias toward action. You are not necessarily going to have enough time to be able to make this your absolute best master's thesis level of work. Let's see how you can jump in.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, please wrap up your work. We're going to take just a couple of minutes for you to share out here.
For the sake of mirroring what we would sort of do with our students in this situation as well, we will let you know, of course, that you will not be evaluated on oral comm for this presentation. We're simply looking for knowledge and thinking in this capacity.
All right, and I would actually like to start with someone from group one. So I'm going to choose this table right back here to give us a start. You're just going to do a table presentation for the rest of the room.
So we looked at the rules and norms and how you can craft rules and norms to promote learner agency, and we kind of ended up thinking about things more for ourselves most than the students are trying to make it. But we came up with using devices responsibly, and the piece of this that stuck out to me was the part for the district or for the school. So oftentimes we think we need to have those things in place for the learners, but actually a couple of the articles mentioned that schools that don't have Wi-Fi any longer, or they still have old school computer labs, that kind of stuff, that's outdated, and it's not creating a 21st century workspace. So we kind of looked at that side of it, some more like rules and norms for ourselves, making sure that we give the students access to everything that they need to do what we're asking them to do. Teacher transparency, pointing out that we are learners too, and when you showcase that in front of the kids, it shows that it's okay to make mistakes. That's the entire point of agency. You soldier on through the problems that you're encountering. I guarantee you we've encountered more problems than they have probably. And then that online collaboration piece, we call it digital citizenship in our district, and it's that kind of knowing your footprint that you're leaving behind. Everything is traceable. Just because you hit delete, it's not gone, that kind of stuff. So making sure that they're aware of that, and that citation piece, I can't remember which article that one came from, but making sure they know you can't just claim other people's academic work, that kind of stuff. And then the big idea that we said was they need to be detailed enough to keep them on track, to provide that framework, but they need to be fluid enough that you're not micromanaging them. That's kind of the point of agency. We're going to give you enough freedom to figure this out, but we've got the pieces to keep you on track.
Awesome. All right, and I'd like a group 2 group, and I'm going to go up front.
We kind of had a read over some of the features of 22nd century, and as we're talking about some of those unique features, we recognise there's a loss of connection relationship. We realise that basic human needs food, water, shelter, and connection. With a loss of connection, how to prepare students to deal with that and to monitor when they lose their sense of well-being or they're starting to suffer personally for it. Doesn't matter how cool the world is that they live in, how fast-paced it is. If you're not doing well in it, then squat. So how do you monitor and manage and ensure that you stay healthy for longevity of life, well-being, all those things. And also looked at the ability to solve problems as you are faced with that increasing complexity, access information that you need, look at the options, make the right choice.
All right, and group 1 in the front.
So our group focuses more on the group and how to create an environment that forces our students to become agents of behaving and thinking. So if you look at our illustration, don't judge us. We actually have at the front, these are 2 big whiteboards, and it's creating like a gallery of thoughts so that students can jot down their ideas as they go along. And we have areas for personalized group space. We found this on Pinterest. It doesn't look like a Pinterest picture, but it's almost there. We have a section for the technology, and we thought it was important to let you know it'll be 1-to-1, a ratio of 1-to-1, so everyone will have their own personal technology piece. And in the back, we actually found a library that didn't have books. It had a Starbucks, so we had our Starbucks and our juicer. They forgot to put we had a juicer. And instead of books, they had text and important documents that the students actually pulled when they needed it to scaffold the lesson. So we have primary sources in the back. And learning around the campfire.
The campfire was the model inspiration for this woman's redesign of her school's library. She wanted a campfire which would draw people in to tell stories and share stories and information. That's what the campfire is. So the library at all your schools in the future will be no walls, no books. It'll have a Starbucks, a juice bar, and a fire pit. So.
So that was basically, we just created the ideal group environment.
All right, and group 2 in the back.
So we kind of went back and forth, is this a skill or a process? Because we figured it was kind of both. Here, the main thing that we're needing to prepare them for is they need to be able to do problem solving. And like I said, we kind of figured it was a process and a skill. First, we talked about they need to be able to do critical thinking, and that was more we thought was was another process and skill. Agency, they need to learn to be accountable for themselves in this problem-solving process or skill. But one of the main things we talked about was collaboration, but not just collaboration in a group or group project in person, but they also need to learn how to collaborate digitally. Like she said on one of her projects, a student was having problems, and so the website they were on had a chat feature where you could click on it and chat with the website designer person. Or like one of mine, that was the phone conference, I had a project where they had to research data plans and they weren't getting the information they wanted, so they looked at customer service and got on their phone and started talking to customer service. So they use their critical thinking, but also not just thinking collaboration is the person sitting next to me. I need to go out and learn to collaborate in different mediums.
So give yourselves all around applause. All right, what we'd like you to do next is within your team, take a moment to think about what this was like for you as a learner. What were the things that made it easier? What are the things that made it harder? What are the things you wanted more time with? And how much did you enjoy the process and why? And, oh, sorry, that's a 1 minute discussion. Go.
You were never there.
No, so I just feel like I was like the snack. And we know that our scholars.
Is this right? Is this right?
And the directions we need to.
Shuttle.
15 seconds? And welcome back together. And I'm going to favor side 2 first. What felt different about this process? Did anything feel like anything different than how you normally do?
I think somebody in our group said at the beginning, we need to process this.
Needed and need to know? Okay.
Yeah, maybe not quite as many breadcrumbs.
Yeah, there wasn't as many instructions.
Not as many instructions, okay?
It was very good, it happened very quickly.
It happened very quickly. Yeah, we gave you very little time. And, you know, if this were students, it would be days as opposed to seconds. We had, yeah, okay, all right.
We actually felt like there was too much time for the little instructions. Like we weren't sure where to go, so we all sat around for a while.
Okay, time for the few instructions that were there. There was too much time for the few instructions that were there. Alright. Can I have somebody from side 1 just quickly read your instructions? Does anybody still have them open? So that side 2 can hear them?
I have ours. Instructions, it started with DQ, what does the ideal student-focused agency infused classroom look like? It said choose one of these topics. Then it said use the following resources that that will cover all the topics. And then share a hard copy poster with the group. You have 5, 5, and 5.
Okay. And what were your topics?
Policies, rules, and norms, text sets, groups, and agenda flow.
Alright, and in side 2, can somebody read their instructions?
Pick any topic of interest for you relating to the 22nd century classroom, skills, norms, processes, your choice. Some resources, the future of education, educational infographics, VIE. Culmination, you can quickly share with the group after, and your insight will be used to inform our school's classroom redesigns at NTACVideo. Please present in a way that makes the most sense in conveying your topic, maybe a prototype or electronically, as long as they can justify the format, must be audience appropriate, share its presentation.
So what are some obvious differences between the tasks that you were assigned?
We had very little instruction.
Very little instruction
Very detailed instruction.
versus very detailed instruction, okay?
They were different topics.
How many of us like very detailed instructions? Okay, and how many of us like to kind of freeform the whole thing and figure out what we have to do? All right. How many of you, actually, let me ask that a different way. What would you have done if you had more time? Collaborated with group 1, okay. Like found out what they were doing within you?
Ask more questions.
Okay.
Would have had more time to research, given the resources.
Yeah, because I gave you enormous resources. I'm like, hey, here's an entire Pinterest page. Knock yourself out.
Here's Pinterest.
Quickly assess each other's strengths.
Dividing the work, like,
Yeah.
plan go.
Okay, so there was also having more time to plan.
Better execution.
Were there any groups that chose to start with planning? Okay, 2 minutes? All right. We're trying to keep time a little tight. In our experience, we never actually finish an agenda, ever. We always go over, so I'm just trying to make this as concise as possible. We want to talk a little bit about why some things that happen for group 2, despite there being frustrating, are really awesome to do to seniors and for them, not just to them. But there is a fun part to that. So we're going to move on and tell you a little bit about some things that have been successful and some things that have not been super successful.
Okay, so first I want to preface by saying that we are going to go very, very quickly through our slide deck because we created our slide deck less to be a presentation and more to just be a way in which we can provide you with resources that you can look at later. So we're going to kind of rip through it fairly quickly because our intention is to give you fairly substantial time towards the end to be able to kind of dig through this stuff. You'll find that there's a ton of links to student work and examples of other things that we have. And our hope is that we can send you home with this so that you can dig a little bit more deeply than really what we have the time to do today. But just to introduce ourselves, so I'm Andrew Biggs, this is Suzanne, my partner teacher, Suzanne Regalia. We are from Napa New Tech and we teach the senior class. So we teach political studies, which is government, economics, and English. So I'm the social studies part, she's the English part. Since we are also really, in California, the way that it works is that many of our seniors have taken most of the classes that they needed, but all of them necessarily need English and social studies. So in many cases, we are the only ones that actually see them. So we sort of serve as the senior gatekeepers to the rest of the world. And so we kind of take that role fairly seriously. But it also means that we see them in the capacity of our academic class, but we also facilitate our senior project at our school. And historically, we've also facilitated their internship stuff and have kind of helped move them along through all of their last minute requirements, just to give you a little bit of backstory of what we're like so that you can have some context.
This year, because the focus had been on agency and we really wanted to incorporate that in our classroom, we had them sort of help us decide what that definition was. And ultimately, it was becoming an agent in your life, making sure that you're the person who directs what's happening rather than letting life happen to you. We found that actually made them think a little bit more about all of the things they were doing, not just the things they were doing in class. How are the things you do actually making your life better rather than worse? What we based our reflection on, we've got a couple of projects that we're going to talk about today, although I'm not sure that's the movement. That was my fault. Yeah, all right. And also senior projects, how that has changed at our school and how we found it to be much more successful this year.
And so ultimately our goal is really what we're going to do is we're going to speed through, giving you kind of an overview of our philosophy to begin with, how that manifested and what we learned from it, and then make the resources and the learning that we've done available to you, and then hopefully give you some opportunities to where you can plan some ideas for how you can potentially leverage the work, all of the work that we've done and all of the incredible learning that we've done and the research that we've done to potentially make some even small changes in your own practice to be able to kind of figure out how to help your own ostensibly 12th grade students be able to figure out how to be able to be successful in the world after. Do you still want to have time for this?
We will make some time. All right, please take 60 seconds at your table to talk about examples of when your students have been connected, effective, or volitional.
I need the definition.
Yeah.
Volitional is being able to, is basically voicing choice in the form of an adjective.
Mommy, you need to talk to her.
Or they know what they have.
But it also is connecting parents. So to me, that was why they have a meeting.
And 0.
Almost there.
And yeah, I was sure. I'd like an example of when a student was connected. Yeah, I just like an example of the time you felt a student was really connected. What were they doing that was like that?
Actively researching something.
Actively researching something? What is the difference between actively and passively researching?
Actually being on device, looking up any information related to the work assignment.
Okay.
I think they're most connected and effective when they have the last one. Oh, you said that. When they, whenever they're connected and effective when they have voice and choice, because they have that buy-in to what, to what they're doing.
And a time that a student has been effective.
When it was related to real life, when they knew they were going to be using this again in their personal lives, that it was very effective because they wanted to really make sure they understood it.
Oh, yes, authenticity.
Also, not just when they're connected to it, but maybe when they know they're making a difference, even if it's in the school, with the community, whatever. They're making a difference.
That is impactful.
Ours were really thankful when they had an opportunity to teach someone else, like upperclassmen. When they were teaching content, and they would have to teach the content of the workshops.
Very speedy discussion. So we kind of were spending some time reflecting after our last year's class, not the most recent class, graduated, and we're thinking about, wow, maybe we didn't really do as great of a service to these students in helping them be prepared for the world outside. And we kind of spent some time over last summer trying to figure out how we could do that, and thinking a lot about agency, especially after NTAC last year. And we were thinking, well, a lot of our students know the agency process. If you ask them, why are we doing peer feedback? All of our students can tell you exactly what they've always been told. They can say word for word what we've always told them, and they will never do it in the classroom unless they're expecting to be graded on it. We even sent out a Google survey saying, what is the purpose of feedback? And they all told us exactly the same things we've always been saying, but when we ask them to do peer feedback and are not actually watching them do it, they won't do the things that they say that it's valuable for. They know how to play school. They know how to do the things that they're supposed to do, but they don't actually necessarily do it. They don't necessarily see the purpose. I was spending a lot of time thinking about the fact that our students know that in order to write a big essay, they're supposed to write a rough draft, and they're supposed to get peer feedback, and they're supposed to do all these other things. But once they leave and go to college, if they don't have to write a rough draft, they never will. They don't really understand the purpose. And so we were thinking, well, what is it that actually makes people learn these agency things? Because clearly it's not having us tell them that they need to. And we were thinking, well, our hypothesis is that the times in which we have personally, as adults, been using these skills is when we personally care about an activity and want it to be good. Like, we are inherently intrinsically motivated. But the issue is that our students, of course, are inherently extrinsically motivated because anything that they ever do, by definition, was told to them by us. We're the ones asking them to do it, regardless of how much authenticity we're able to inject in it. And so we spent some time doing some research into figuring out how we might be able to psychologically be able to draw the same kind of responses out of our students that match intrinsic motivation. We're going to come back to that in a bit. But one of the things that we've been doing at our school, starting last year, is the Design Thinking Challenge, which was actually created by the D School at Stanford, which spends a lot of time having students empathize with a client, make a prototype, get feedback, go through revision, do all of these things. So it was sort of a prime time for us to be able to do some of the things that we were doing because we literally started the school year off having students do that. So there was already a little bit of context for them doing this whole revision process in a way that historically they hadn't always had as much access to.
And in fact, despite the fact that a lot of seniors were like, oh, it's one of those things, it was kind of a waste of time, we found that the skills that they got from it, it was a lot easier to say, this is an iteration, we let them do a reiteration. They're like, oh, I get another chance to do this over, okay. And they were way less resistant to the idea of turning it in and ignoring that it had ever happened, which was really nice for us.
So you can jump into this.
Sorry.
What's that? So basically, we ended up bouncing and finding research that supported our stuff in two different directions. So I'll have you start with
All right.
your emphasis here.
One of the focuses I had in lots of other education was looking at Knowles' 4 principles of andragogy, which is adult learning. It's the ways that adults learn. It's the ways that we all kind of like to learn, is that it needs to be important to us. It needs to bank on the fact that we know stuff, and that it needs to actually serve us in some way. It needs to make whatever it is we're working on easier or better.
And I had ended up doing some research and found an article by a couple of gentlemen, Ryan and Desi, 2000 is when they had published this. That's actually a link, feel free to check that out, that will give you the resource. And essentially what they had found is that if students in a class and in an activity can feel as though they are connected, effective, and volitional, that they will mirror psychologically the same things as they would if they were intrinsically motivated. So their definitions for connected was basically that they said that students needed to feel as though whatever they were working on would have a positive effect upon communities that they care about. Whether that's their local community, whether that's their friends, whether that's their peers, whatever it be, it has to have an effect in their perceptions of the community they care about. Also, they have to feel as though they are effective. They have to be able to have the sense that they will be able to do the activity successfully. So they have to be able to have some sense of clarity and some sense of support in that they have the capacity to do it, essentially. But also, volition, voice and choice, the thing that we as NTN schools have been talking about for a while. They have to feel as though they have the ability to make choices within their project. Whether that comes from, well, really in both capacities of being able to demonstrate what they've learned in ways that make sense to them, but also in choices for how they ultimately manifest their end products. And for those of you that are familiar with Dan Pink and his work in the book Drive, these things will probably sound familiar to you, but here's another resource that will essentially mirror a lot of the things they were also talking about.
Ultimately, what we found is that these sets of principles really served each other well and had a lot to do with how we thought about seniors this last year. Really more about how can they be involved in their.
And so ultimately, when it came to creating a project, we decided that we really wanted to leverage this connected, effective, and volitional, or agentic, as they had originally called it, into a project. And so we thought about how we could essentially make that. Well, the next thing that we were going to do is deal with a project that was talking about campaigning, voting, and the political spectrum. So we wanted to come up with a project for those things that could leverage this stuff. Because historically, we've been finding that our students are totally into campaigning, and it seemed like a really good entry point for us to essentially just try a thing that we believed in. And so in trying to include each of these three things, first we wanted to leverage connected so that we could have them do something that was connected to the community. So we ended up connecting with our local registrar of voters and then just contacting him and saying, hey, we have some students that are interested in this process. What can we do to help you? Is there a need that you have that students might be able to fulfill? Ultimately, he had said, hey, there are a lot of people in the community that totally vote against their interests, and it's super weird, and nobody really knows why they do it other than a lack of information. Maybe your students can do something to help educate other young people. So we decided, awesome, all right. So we connected with him and said, that's all awesome, great, cool, but how are you going to give us a more authentic forum for this? And he said, you know what, if you make resources, you can pitch them to our people, and then we'll put it in the voter guide that will come out for the next election. So then we had a place in which our student work would go to the community where everybody would see it, their parents could see it, and then they could essentially, show everybody and be excited in the same way as, people used to put their work on the refrigerator when they were younger. In trying to be effective, we tried a little bit of an interesting technique. We were very clear with them about the content knowledge that they would have to ultimately learn and be able to demonstrate, but we were intentionally vague about the product. But the way in which we were able to help them feel effective with this is we just said, hey guys, you're really part of your demographic. You're almost 18. You know the kind of products that you need for this. You're literally marketing to other people that are just like you. Here's the content that you need, but you figure out what the product looks like that would be effective for you and the people that you know. This is something that you can totally handle to your demographic. So we essentially just let them make whatever they wanted. We gave them a list of the content, told them you can make 1 product, you can make 10 products. The only thing that you have to do is be able to, at the end of it, justify and explain to us why you think the method for that product, the method that you took for that product fits the content that you were trying to convey to the people. And so ultimately what we did to assess that, and this is a link, we'll just speed through it, but we had them at the end ultimately do a rubric of defense, and that was how we ultimately manifested this. So we created a rubric for this whole thing, but their job was to ultimately create a product, explain why that product was the best thing, and then also justify to us where they felt like they deserved to be on the rubric for grading. So it allowed them a little bit of an opportunity to feel some buy-in on that and also feel effective, because then they could ultimately justify to us what was valuable about their work. In trying to continue the agentic piece, of course, we also allowed them to be able to have volition and choice over the way in which they demonstrated their benchmark stuff. We had ultimately created this document called an IKTO, which is an individual knowledge and thinking organizer, yes. Do you want to click it? Because this might be worth opening. Essentially what we did is we created this organizer for them that ultimately had all of the different content pieces. They had some space in the center in which they could just say whether they don't understand it at all, they kind of understand it, or they totally understand it, and they provided us a link to something that they did that would prove to us that they knew it. In our class, we had created some lessons and activities and stuff that supported a lot of these. So for some of our struggling students, they had the option to just link some of the activities that we were already having them do in workshops. For some of these items, we didn't do anything in class about that at all, and we just said, hey, as a group, you need to figure what this is for voters, so you let us know how you ended up figuring it out. It worked really well, both for the students that just want a little bit of creativity and want to be able to just kind of not have to do the lesson that we had provided for them, and then figure out another way to do it and submit that. And it worked really, really well for our special needs students, especially the ones that may have, if we had asked them to do a vlog and they're really uncomfortable speaking or being on camera, they could find another way to do it, and as long as they proved to us that they knew the information for this, then we could use this to measure their knowledge and thinking stuff, as opposed to whatever we were forcing them to do, and then muddling up their knowledge and thinking grade with whatever their aptitude was and whatever skill we were trying to ask them to do in order for us to assess it. So it allowed it to be a little, significantly more pure of an assessment of their just knowledge and thinking.
And keep in mind, it was actually interesting to watch the number of students who started off in note, and watch their little X's move over. So you actually kind of saw them in real time and go, oh, I get this now.
As a side note, also super cool way to figure out where your students are at and figure out what you kind of want to workshop the next time you have workshop time. Because if you find that you're looking at, oh, the students have no idea what the presidential campaign process is and a lot of your students are in the know, it's a surefire way of figuring out what most students will need in workshops. So
these are just some examples of election of 1984 was from the class of 2015. They're really fun videos. They definitely don't show a whole lot of content. They did a great job of entertaining us, but not so much proving that they knew stuff. Over here is Democracy Gap. This is last year's. A heck of a lot more content and a huge array of stuff they could do. So you want to just talk about the examples?
Really, I just wanted to provide these so that you could get a sense of the change in what students were able to do as a result of how we made changes. These, again, are fairly simple videos that, again, didn't really have much content. But as of this most recent project, we had students make websites, brochures, videos, board games, Dungeons & Dragons style tabletop games to illustrate the presidential campaign process. It was all over the board. But they were able to justify we had a student that's like, I'm really into this gaming stuff, and I'm on a subreddit where there's a lot of people that have no idea what they're talking about politically, but want to talk about games. He was like, this is who that's for. And was able to justify how that was a perfect use of his time to be able to reach that demographic.
And one of my favorite parts for us as teachers, we spend a lot of time going, that's never gonna work, and later having to go, that totally works. So it's pretty exciting to tap into the things that they're good at and excited about. And I keep using them.
I also just made some infographics that I'll allow you to spend a little bit more time with, but we've collected data on students' knowledge and thinking scores of previous projects and knowledge and thinking scores of the current one, as well as agency scores. We had focused specifically on the students that in previous projects had been achieving at 80% or below in these learning areas, and then revisited those same students in this project. And you can see that now the knowledge and thinking score went from like an average of below 50% for those students to an average of above 70, which for some students meant that some of them just didn't, that just submitted anything and were able to demonstrate any knowledge and thinking when they hadn't before, and others just as a nature of the process and knowing that somebody was going to be seeing their work, felt a little bit more bought into making it look like they knew what they were talking about because their parents were going to see what their stuff was. And you can see that the same thing, the same issue with agency. And this is some infographics because we actually polled the students to see what they thought about the process, to reflect on that for us. You can see that this is relating to their confidence in the value of their products compared to previous projects in this one. This is their perceived autonomy that they felt that they had in this project versus the last one. And this is ultimately just what they felt about this idea of having so much autonomy. You can see that the largest portion of them were like, we thought it was awesome, we could do whatever we wanted, and we could be as creative and as awesome and use as many of our skills as we're comfortable with, and I thought that was great. But these ones, I think, are really our key students, because these are the ones that said, all of this freedom and lack of instruction was insane, we had no idea what we were doing, it was ridiculous, but we tried really hard, and ultimately it was awesome, and I'm prouder of this than I've been proud of anything else because it matters to me, and I learned a whole bunch about my ability to be able to, have value in the stuff that I have.
Yeah, the amount of buy-in from the students who generally like to opt out was really exciting. And we had the experience of having students that we had had before. Andrew had been a long-term sub when they were freshmen. I had them as sophomores, and now we have them as seniors. So we really knew kind of who were going to be our kids who did opt out, and getting them to buy in was so great. It was so validating for us because this is finally we saw really quality work.
What do you think your key to buy-in was? The open-endedness?
I think the ability for them to create what it is they were going to do to prove what they knew, as opposed to doing what they saw as jumping through hoops.
One of our key students that I would say that jumps to mind immediately, definitely hugely into hip hop and feels as though that skill set is all that he's good at. And so this allowed him an opportunity to be able to figure out, hey, in the hip hop community, there's a lot of people that have some pretty serious needs that are being underrepresented, and maybe I can use that art form that I have a skill set with to be able to access them in a way that potentially in our community of Napa hasn't historically been able to be accessed. Yeah.
And to follow that up, what do you do to kids who feel they don't have any specific skill set that would lend itself to the project? Because I get a lot of kids who are like, well, I can't, she's hip hop, she's whatever. I don't know.
Frequently we found that those kids are actually, what they find is that they don't have a skill set that teachers expect. And so helping them find the thing that they're excited about, what do you do when you're not at school? And there's something that they know a lot about, but it hasn't had a landing spot at school yet. So they don't validate it until you tell them we're going to validate whatever it is you figure out you're excited about.
We also spend a fair amount of time counseling our students, especially with seniors, I guess exclusively with seniors. When they're having a hard time with that very issue, we'll pull them aside and say, all right, in your group, what do you feel like everyone's strength is? And what do you feel is missing? How do you feel about jumping into that role? And then essentially we can have them start the conversation of how they can work as a team. We've been doing that sort of thing since before this, and that tends to work fairly well with them. Because again, they've known each other for 4 years, and I like to say that if there's anything that we do especially well at our school, it's culture. And by the time they're seniors, they all know each other and want to be useful, don't want to necessarily be seen as the kid that doesn't have any addition. So they're generally pretty interested in having that conversation with other teammates of, hey, what can I do? I know you're good at this, I know you're good at this. How can I help supplement this, or how can we readjust roles? And that tends to work fairly well for us.
All right, I'm going to give you a 1-minute planning session, and you don't really need to look at the big list of things. Just Just imagine you have 6 months during which you'll be asked to spend a minimum of 10 hours per week on a project about which you feel passionate. What would it be? Mull it over for 60 seconds. Go.
Seconds.
All right, if anything on your outfit is purple, green, or pink, please stand up. Purple, green, or pink. Is it moving back there? This purplish, I'll take it. All right, we're going to speed round this. We're just going to go around the room. You're going to say what you would do for those 6 months. I'm going to start there.
I would start making my own budget.
Cool.
On clothing.
I will play video games for every single hour.
All right.
I would probably incorporate more art into my lessons.
Okay.
Awesome.
Like some sort of creative writing thing.
Love it.
I try to find a way to make use of cell phones in my geography class.
Nice.
I opened a surf shop.
You would what?
I opened a surf shop.
Okay.
She said sweatshop. It's gonna be hot, but not a sweatshop.
I would try to find ways to incorporate forensics and statistics
Nice.
In your free time.
Plan road trips across the country.
Nice.
Making sure. I would want to be able to get my kids out and let them work in the outdoor setting, a garden, a park, something to go out and experience science in an outdoor environment.
For my classroom, it would be more, trying to get more real life projects that they're going to continue to use.
Okay.
Planning a lecture series or series of writing workshops from writers of the community at school.
I would do a global entry.
Love it.
All right. So 20 years ago in our district, we had an English teacher in a tie, and he said, hey, when students are seniors, they check out for the last 5 months, and they don't do anything. And so he came up with this idea for senior project, and the idea was this was to keep them engaged for the rest of the year. Senior project had, over the years, a lot of district influence and then less district influence. But a lot of that kind of stuck around. And so what happened was that the way senior project was working was that students came up with an idea of what they wanted to do, and then they waited to get it approved. And once they got it approved, they had a number of assignments that justified that they were doing something through the whole thing. And then they said it was about teaching lifelong learning. And we're like, how does that teach lifelong learning? That just teaches them to follow what a teacher tells them to do. So last year, we worked really, really hard on changing how senior project was done at our school, because we were getting about a 40 to 50% involvement rate. Because kids knew, basically, if you didn't do it, it just lowered your grade, 1 full grade. And if you weren't one of those kids really committed to an A, you're like, whatever, I don't really need it. So it gave them too many options to buy out. This year, one of the things we changed was we made it worth nothing. We just told them they were going to do it. And then we kept telling them they were going to do it. But then they came to us and they had like 3 ideas, and we're like, which are you most excited about? And that's what they were supposed to start with. And then we said, here are some things you might want to do, and they didn't really have to. What they had to focus on was, what is your process? So we had them really, really focus on what are the things that were working for them and what were the things that weren't. And when we made it about that, most of them were more involved, and some of them sort of checked out for about 3 months. Because we start in like August, and we present in April. And so some of them, about 3 months before, were like, I haven't done anything and I'm gonna fail. okay, what do you want to do now? And they had to figure out where they were moving next. So the whole goal was really to figure out, when you are completely bombing at something, how do you move forward? And when you're completely rocking at something, but it wasn't what you expected to rock at, how do you move forward? And we got a lot more buy-in, because all of a sudden they could fail miserably, or they could only finish halfway, and they could still be successful, because they could still analyze what it was they were learning from it. So in some cases, we've got students who are still working on their senior project, and they're having a blast with it. And we had students who learned to surf, and we had students who learned to tailor pants, and we had students who made an electric car. Literally like got a car in pieces and then found all the parts to turn it into an electric car, which I've heard now moves and can stop, and they're pretty excited about that. They haven't figured out how to get it to 65, so that's the goal. But really concentrating on all of those things, but then making it so kind of hands-off by us that, and it's not as though we didn't answer questions, because they came to us every single day. And some of them were the same student who came every single day. They still had those questions, they still had those, but they found so many more ways to use their mentors, to use the people who teach them other things. Instead of having them write a blog that nobody ever saw, we had them join a forum where there were people who were experts, but also people who were struggling and learning at the same time. We had them reach out to places that they normally wouldn't go. They're required to find a mentor. It just has to be somebody they don't already know. For some of them, that was singularly the hardest part of the entire project. But ultimately what they found was that they could do it, and they didn't die. So that was really successful for us. All right, this year we ended up with a success rate of 100%. And we did have one student who's like, I tried, and I failed, and here are the number of reasons why. And this is what I learned about myself. And here's what I would do differently. And we said, that's a total win. That's exactly what we wanted you to do.
And before we take the question, I do want to add that I think this bullet point here is probably the most important thing that contributed to that 100%. Because again, we cut out the grade. It was no longer about a grade for them. And that allowed them to free up this thought process of, wow, last year's seniors, I thought their projects are pretty cool. I think that my other friends' projects are pretty cool. Now it's about making sure that like these other people that I'm doing it with really also see how cool my project is. And it became more about this, what can I do that really like improves myself and is a thing that I've always wanted to do so that I can continue to show what it is about myself that's awesome to these other people that are here to celebrate me. And we made it more of getting rid of the grade, essentially just sort of naturally turn it into this, wow, we're all doing awesome stuff, let's like help each other along, as opposed to, look, I'm gonna get a better grade than that guy over there because my project is X and this is Y. It just sort of changed the whole dynamic based on what was essentially a gamble.
So then was the open presentations, were they required for all of the seniors? Because I'm wondering, okay, that's the piece that I was like, I mean, if there's nothing associated to it, then, okay, so they had to do the
presented, and in
presentation.
fact, everybody
Okay.
wrote a paper, and the paper was graded.
Okay,
But it wasn't necessarily part of the project, it was a reflection on the project.
okay, that's where I was confused. I'm like,
So
there
their
has to be
CRA
something,
actually was
yeah.
their senior project this year, which was great, because if you're doing CRAs, you know that sometimes they're really hard to get from students. We found that it was a lot easier to get them because they were just writing about something they were super excited about, and that made it really easy to get it. Yes?
If there's no grade required on it, or there's no grade, but it's required, how did you get them to do it? What was the, penalty, if you didn't do it?
My favorite thing was that they forgot there was no grade.
It was
They
literally
forgot
what happened.
everything.
But my question is, how did you get to that point? Because our kids in our school, it doesn't matter how mediocre it is it bring a pencil in class? If there's not a grade attached to it, there will be no pencil in my classroom.
I think that was part of it, was that the kids who were focused on the grade and kept finding the thing that would please us, when we finally got them to the idea that they didn't have to please us, they needed to please themselves, they got excited about what they were doing because they got to filch time away from, they got to tell their parents, hey, I'm playing video games for my senior project. And all of a sudden, it gave them the time to do the thing they wanted to do anyway. And even though they were very grade focused, I mean, being the grade focused probably was the thing that they were like, well, I have to get it done anyway because I'm going to have to do the paper.
It's also worth mentioning that the open presentations are largely like sort of assessed by people that we brought in to be other guest judges. So we have people from the community who would be coming in and evaluating them and asking follow-up questions, and they knew from the very beginning that they would be going through that process. Our students are pretty comfortable with being chuckleheads to us, but being chuckleheads to other people that they've never met is a little bit more nerve-wracking for them, so they're a little bit more motivated to make themselves look like they know what's going on.
To have a open presentation with a little bit more of a buy-in be that they have to choose certain members of the panel that they want to impress, would that help?
That would actually be really awesome. And some of them did actually say, my mentor's going to be there, can they be a panelist? I'm like, sure, we need some panelists, that's great. So we had a chef that was a panelist for a student who specifically wanted her to be there. So we're certainly open to it. Haven't required it yet.
They seem pretty long, so it's not
It turns out that not having set benchmarks meant that they came to us frequently and said, this is where I am and I'm concerned. Or, this is where I am and I think I'm gonna be done next week, what do I do about that? And we're like, maybe you need to look a little deeper at something else and helping you actually draw it out longer in some cases. But they will check in either way. Again, despite reminding them 27 times that there was no grade associated with it, they were still really concerned with making sure that they got something done.
For clarity, it's also worth mentioning that we had them establish and set up blogs in which they would talk about their process and how frequently they were doing things, and they shared the links with us, so that even though it wasn't, again, explicitly graded, they knew that we were occasionally looking at their blogs to see how much they had done and checking in with them. Mostly just anecdotally to ask how things were going and reflect with them, just kind of as we would be circulating in work time even. But that's sort of how we were able to see who had done what.
So to summarize a little bit, you mentioned that you actually assessed their CRA